Anne's talk is called Just Do It, Inclusive Description of Moving Image at the National Library of Scotland. And Anne is Moving Image Curator at the National Library, working from the Moving Image Archive at Kelvin Hall in Glasgow. Anne manages the description of film and video to make as much of it as possible alternative to view on via the library catalogue. Anne is also a long-standing member of the CILIPS Metadata and Discovery Group in Scotland. So Anne, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. I'll just start my presentation. I'll skip the first slide because you've already introduced me, so thank you, Jeanette. I'm just going to dive right in because I've got quite a lot to get through, and hopefully we'll have a wee bit of time for questions after as well. Okay, I wanted to start off today with this quote. What is inclusive description? And this was actually from Carissa Chu, who was mentioned in one of the earlier presentations. She worked as an intern at the Equalities, Diversity, Inclusion intern with us at the National Library of Scotland back in 2020. And we really worked closely with Carissa in trying to improve the language used in our catalogue for moving image. And so I've just quoted her description of what inclusive description is. And there's also a link to her glossary in its current form, which I'll not go into in any great detail, but I do encourage you to look at that because it's full of really interesting and valuable information about how we use language in the catalogue and how we should be considering all the different aspects of what people think about catalogues. So at the Moving Image Archive, we have 2 members of curatorial staff doing cataloguing, certainly not full time. One of them being me, and we also have metadata staff who work usually on externally funded projects. Prior to that, there's been all sorts of people involved in cataloguing, not always professionally qualified, but they could be technicians, they could be outreach officers, whatever. So I think the time that Carissa and other academics had to spend developing this glossary with the National Library, it was really useful because we just wouldn't have had time to think about that really just in our day-to-day work. So it gave us confidence and it gave us reassurance as well. And also it challenged us to think about how we describe things in the catalogue. And I just think that I'll take you through what we've done with that in a practical way as well. So a wee bit of context for you to begin with. The Moving Image Archive is not your typical library catalogue. We've been around since 1976, not always with the National Library. Before that, we were with Scottish Screen, and prior to that, the Scottish Film Council. So it's been really ad hoc. There's been a card catalogue that was developed in the 70s. As I say, people from Scottish Television would have contributed to the descriptions, technical staff, curatorial staff, academics, a lot of different voices involved. So that's quite an interesting period because the way that the descriptions would have built up would have been quite different. The first librarian came in the 90s, but the real cataloguing jobs didn't really start until the late 90s. And at that point, there was a proper catalogue with international standards that we use, and we continue to this day. But right up till about 2003, the catalogue was hidden. You really couldn't see it unless you came to the archive in person, or if you consulted a paper printout that often went out of date. So the first online catalogue was when people saw the reality of how we describe things. And I think generally it's very good, but there would have been even then issues with some of the words that were used in the catalogue. And then in 2016, we opened at Kelvin Hall, and that changed everything again because suddenly we had everything digitised, not everything, but a huge amount of content digitised to view. We also had our first really good online catalogue that people could consult both at home and at the library. So the work that we've done with the terminology in the catalogue really started in 2021 in earnest, and that was again working with Carissa and the Equalities and Diversity agenda in the library. I'd fought for this for years because I don't like hiding things, and I think it goes against all library instincts. We want to share, we're publicly funded, we should be telling people the national collection and what it has, not only to people in Scotland, but across the world. The library has a hidden collections programme and a 1/3 digital programme, as well as its reaching people strategy, which really drove the support that I got in actually opening up the catalogue. And now we can actually, those programmes are basically to try and list all of the collections within the library that are catalogued, and also to offer digital access to digital and digitised material by, I think, 2025, but I'm sure my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong. But to me, this was long overdue. We hadn't really thought about the way that the earlier records, particularly that were now being published, we hadn't really thought about how they'd been described and what sort of biases were in those descriptions possibly. For example, there was some Scottish television sports journalists that would have written some descriptions, and obviously they did bring biases towards religion, towards sport and things like that a Glaswegian might understand, but we wouldn't be wanting to publish that now. Okay. And one thought I also have, which I'm not really going to talk about today, but moving image catalogue records themselves are inextricably linked to the content. Can we or do we need to view and describe everything anymore when we digitise by default? So we're now actually getting to a point where for some collections, we're not even describing them. We're just taking secondary source material and we're having to make a judgment call on whether we trust it or not. So there's all sorts of issues out there about equality and diversity in the actual moving image that I will touch on at the very end. But what I'm really going to talk about today is the catalogue records themselves. So the speed of change, just to give you an indication, in 2019, we had about 6,000 records visible and catalogued online to the public. 2 years later, we had over double that, and suddenly they were online. And that's what really made us think we need to go back and look at some of these catalogue records and make sure that we're not publishing things that some people may find offensive or triggering. And then again, even now, I looked the other day and we've got 21,000 up. And that, I mean, the increase in the rate of catalogue records going onto our catalogue is just increasing all the time. So we don't fully shortlist anymore either. So we don't take a very detailed description of the action of a film anymore with keywords. We do have keywords, but not as many now. We form a very, as good a synopsis as we can do in the time we have. So I think there's also an argument to say we are restricting access in some ways and inclusivity in the text catalogue record, while at the same time we're expanding inclusivity in the sense that we're digitising everything and you can see it even on site at the library or at home. So there are things that a cataloguer we've had to change a huge amount over the last few years, just in our whole mindset about our acceptance of how much we can catalogue and how much we can research and how much we can spend time really worrying over the detail of a catalogue. So yeah, the topic of my talk today is just let's do something about this. And we did. And I think, first of all, we acknowledged that we had some imperfections in the catalogue and that was okay. And I think we shouldn't be scared of admitting that. But likewise, after we did the task that I'll talk about, most of our records were okay and we shouldn't worry too much. I think we have to acknowledge that we've got a problem and we have to look at it. So we started a practical programme of work to tackle any unsuitable language that we used in the catalogue. And most importantly, we continued to communicate with our audiences to improve those catalogue descriptions. So at the Moving Image Archive, we don't just catalogue it. We engage with events, we engage with community groups, we engage with academics, with colleagues in the library world to make those catalogue descriptions better. And that's really important. And I think that's one of the strengths of the moving image catalogue, that it isn't just a professional's view, and we aren't tied down to as many. We're not tied down to the Library of Congress subject headings as much as other areas of the library, and that was why we were able to possibly look at how we change things and tweak things. And we also wanted to push for a policy statement and support for this work across the National Library, and I think we are achieving that now. This was really a wee pilot really, to see if we could show the library this was doable. So enough about that. I think the next section of my talk will be really to try and show you some of the things that we've done practically to change and improve the language in the catalogue.
Anne, I'm so sorry to interrupt. We're seeing some black bars going across the top of your slides. It might be because your cursor's resting there.
Oh, sorry.
Can you give that a go?
I've had this issue before and we weren't able to get rid of it. I'm sorry. It's just along the top, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think we're just missing the heading now, but thanks for trying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I don't know if I can move that. Sorry. Hopefully you can see the main part of the screen anyway.
We can do, thank you.
Okay. So this is going back to, let me just get my notes. This is going back to the start, really. This was a member of staff had brought up that one of the catalogue records had the word tinkers in it, and that was quite offensive, I think, and they wanted to get that changed because they didn't think that was appropriate language to be used, and we agreed. So what we did was my colleague printed out any examples of that word that were in the catalogue, and he went through them and he worked out if he could change the language. So he would put things like itinerant or travelling people in instead. You can see some of the, from this, you can see the red text show you that that was actually online already, so we rectified that, but some of the catalogue records at that stage hadn't even made it online, so we were able to fix that before people saw it. And you can see, I'll try and take you through this example, if I can move on. Oh, can't seem to move my slide. That's it. This is an example of the word tinkers in a catalogue record and how we changed it. So you can see down the bottom, this is a short list, and this is from our internal catalogue. And you can see at the start, the highlighted pink section, Tinkers on the Road in Summer. Now that's underlined. So what that means is it's an intertitle in the film. So it's actually written on the film, and that's the source. So we wouldn't change that. But when you see it online, you can see there's no underlined. So people viewing the catalogue from Japan or Shetland, they won't necessarily understand that that was written on the film. But if they get in touch, we can always tell them that. But that just shows you one of the issues that we have with online. It's not always absolutely accurate, but we do have the record at the National Library that people can look at. You can also see the descriptions have been changed, so we no longer use that word. We would use itinerant people or travelling people in the green highlighted section there. So it just shows you that's a quick way of changing things for the better. This is an example from Carissa's glossary, which I hope you can see. I hope it's not blocking too much. But this is an example of the term Eskimo, which we did find in the catalogue as well, which is not really acceptable now either. So you can see that the glossary will explain all the different words on the blue section about what Eskimo is known as. It will then go into some details about the context and history of the term. And then in the green section, you can see it'll give you a preferred term and give you a wee bit of a hint about how to use it. And this was really useful. So you can see Eskimo should not be used to describe the Inuit or Inuvialuit of Canada and so on. So it'll give you some background and you can then change your terminology accordingly. You'll also see to the right that there's tags and there's a link to the Library of Congress subject heading that's used. We don't really use that in the moving image, but obviously in the library as a whole we do. So it's really interesting to see the links. And also you can see along the right, there's links to other information and background and terminologies and all sorts of resources. So this is a really rich resource that I think if you are looking to improve language, it's a really good resource to use. And again, there's the link. So this is an example of our in-house work to do with, you can see Eskimos on the list there, but this was a list that what we did was we took what we knew were we knew what was in the catalogue that might be offensive, and we cross-checked Carissa's glossary against those terms, and we picked out, I think, the 57 of the terms that we wanted to change and look at. So you can see there's things like epilepsy, junkie, mad, oriental, paraplegics, things like that, golly. So there's all sorts of words that we knew that were in the catalogue that we wanted to change. And this is just our tracker of, you can see on the second column, that was how many we found in the catalogue, how many instances. So you can see there down the bottom, mental, 43 times we found that word. And then we checked them all and only 7 were changed. So just because we found a term didn't mean it was actually offensive. We just had to check it and look at the glossary and actually make that informed decision. This is also, we have a document in the National Library where we track all the changes. So whether we change it or not, we would track it. So you can see here, Eskimos, we've changed it to Inuit quite a few times, but we haven't changed the title because that is the actual archival record. Eskimo fish fillets we wouldn't change because that's just a product name. There's all sorts of things. This is just a very brief example of the sorts of things that we would record and change or not. But that is always there, and it's a matter for reference. So if a member of the public, for example, did ask about what we've done about this sort of thing with the language, we could go and we could actually show them that we've made a record. And I think that's really important, because prior to this project, if we did see a term that we didn't think was right, we would just change it and there wouldn't have been a record made. So I think it's really important to document things now. What you can also see here is this is Scotland on Screen, which is another service that we provide with film from the Moving Image Archive, and it's a content advisory. And with this site, which is really an educational site, we've supplied films to that, but we've also supplied a lot of more richer metadata. And one of the things that was supplied within that was content advisory. So you can see here, we've got a film where children sneak into a toy shop, but some of the toys are gollywog dolls and Red Indian figures. So there's been a bit of context put in what these are and why they're offensive, and just to warn people. It's really an advisory. So I think that this is something that if we could resource a content advisory in the catalogue, we would. But at the moment, we're not going down that road of actually going through all the films and trying to work out if we need to put content advisories on. So what we have here is, so I suppose at the end of all this, we reviewed it. It took us 9 months, and it certainly wasn't a full-time job. It was really as and when we had time. So for 9 months, 14,000 records were checked and changed if necessary. You can see here, we've got an example of, this was a big data set that Grampian Television supplied us with, and we took a secondary source material and we just imported all the descriptions into the catalogue. But we also checked them because we weren't sure that they were okay either. And things like this, you can see Diane Abbott, coloured union activist. Now, we would not want to put that in our catalogue if we were writing the description, so we took it out. So I think you've got to watch with external sources as well for moving image. The huge data sets that are coming to us, we have to analyse that and think, MG Alba, BBC, they've supplied us with a huge amount of data. We trust that. Grampian Television from the 1980s, we chose not to trust that. So it is a bit subjective, but I think MG Alba's online already, and we know that they would have gone through a process of checking at the BBC. We weren't sure about what they did in the 80s in Grampian. So I guess it's a judgment call for the cataloguing staff as to how we treat each collection that we get in. So in terms of, that was a bit of a race through it, but of course I'm happy to show anyone in more detail if you want to get in touch. In terms of future work that we're involved in with this, there is now a metadata description terminology group in the library, which I think is a great development, because I think we shouldn't just be doing it in moving image. We should be talking to colleagues across all the collections in the library, across maps, music, legal deposit, because not everybody can do what we've done and we can't do what they're going to do. So it's trying to make sure that we know as a library what our priorities are, what our resources are like, and if there's anything we can do to standardise things and document approaches and make sure that we're all understanding what we're doing in conjunction with this. So things like sharing information about descriptive practices, considering overlaps in practices, using this group as a sort of group that gets any issues referred to it for decision, and likewise escalate up to the library management team. So I think we need to make sure that this work is formalised and is treated on a library-wide basis, and following on from that, to have some sort of statement about the language in the catalogues in the library, which I think is imminent. I think that it gives the staff confidence, the staff that are dealing with the public and so on, just to know that we do have some things that are not, they haven't been looked at, and we just don't have the resource at the moment to look at, but we do acknowledge that there are some issues with the catalogues. We're also undertaking a content advisory pilot for moving image, and that's to do with the moving image side, which, as I said before, I'll touch on in the last few minutes. I think we've dealt really well with the language in the catalogue and the text descriptions, and I think we are confident that they have been looked at and not dealt with, but they've been amended to be as objective and fair as possible. But this is almost more pressing to us. What do you do with the moving image that people might want to be warned about? There's all sorts of things in the moving image catalogue, all sorts of attitudes from the past, all sorts of terminologies that are just not acceptable now and should never be accepted. So I think, but we don't want to censor the collection. We want to treat it as a historical collection and be able to show people it in context. So we're now starting another small pilot project to address just this issue. So things like audio commentaries that mentioned tinkers there, we wouldn't be able to edit that or censor it, but we want to be able to say to people, there might be something in this film that you want to know exists. Likewise, we have films where we've published the catalogue record, for example, Golly's Party, but at the moment we're not publishing the film because we want to make sure we've got that content advisory on there before a child or any age group would see it and maybe misinterpret or not understand what a gollywog is. So it's a really difficult issue for us, and I think that the main thing I would say from the whole experience, and my colleagues as well, it's been so good to do this, and it's really shown us that we are doing a good job. We have a really accurate catalogue, but yes, there are issues that we have to look at and discuss with colleagues, discuss with audiences, and make sure that we come to a better descriptive practice. And I think the things that we do with the moving image that's connected to that will be really interesting, and I think that we just want people to experience the collection, but also to be supported in viewing that and understanding the historical context that it came from. So that's a very, very rushed view of the issues that we've come from, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them. Thank you.
That was tremendous, Anne, and thank you. And thanks for giving us those worked examples of how you did the review and how you actually, how you addressed the challenges and the difficulties that you found. We have a few questions for you. Lorna asks, she says it's a really interesting presentation and thanks you for that. Would it be possible for the NLS to share the template that's been used to record the changes made to the catalogues?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm pretty sure it was devised by us, so I'd be happy to share that with colleagues. I'm not connected. I wasn't sure how to share the internet, but basically it's just a SharePoint document that we have internally. And as you could see from that, it's very basic. It's just the catalogue record and just documenting what the changes that you made were and when you made them and who made them. So it's really just a spreadsheet at the end of the day. But I can share that certainly.
That's great. I think it's really important. And that tracking of changes is just so good. And I think we all benefit from that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, our next one is, Colin says it's great work. Taking a practical view of resource discovery, how to direct users to the preferred terms when the search may include, now let's see, how do you direct users to the preferred terms when their search may include the outdated and triggering terms? Does that make more sense?
That's a good question. I think with that's what I was saying about the Moving Image Archive catalogue. We don't have access points like Library of Congress standard subject terms. We have you'll see that we do have an in-house sort of thesaurus of terms, but in terms of these sort of, it's not that detailed where we could go to, like, somebody might put in Eskimo in their search term and it'll direct you to Inuit. I don't think that. I think now when you search the catalogue, you just won't find Eskimo in some of those, in that, when they're described in the way that we don't want it to be described. So it is a difficult one. I think we're not publishing the before and after of the catalogue. You would have to come as a researcher and find that from our documentation, and you would track that through the documentation that we have. But we can, as curators, we would guide you through that. But yeah, I think that all the Moving Image Archive records are findable through library search through the Primo interface in the National Library. So there's probably some control there over terms that might be related as well. Sorry, that's not a very good answer.
That's great, Colin.